Oh, boom. Hi, my name is Jodie Black and welcome to the channel. I discuss books, reading, magic, occasionally the Moomins. I am a postdoctoral researcher at a UK university. I teach courses on science and science fiction, the history of medicine, the history of mental health, and the history of science. I am currently working on a project to do with objects in the imagination and ancient magic. I also work on health anxiety, especially anxiety in the ancient world. And finally, I write unpublishable science fiction and fantasy about living in a society that is essentially a magical Chernobyl. Now, I did kind of want to start by saying thank you very much to everyone who liked and commented and watched the video that I did. That was my first real video for YouTube and not just me sending across a live stream of me chatting while I work on the Moomin house. You can see the Moomin house there. It is ongoing. It has a roof now, and it also does not have its chimney because the chimney is going to require some work and me getting hold of some Mod Podge, and I don't have any yet. So I did say that I was going to do a video about Moominmamma next, so this is it. This is a bit of a hard shift from talking about Audra Winter and book talk drama. However, there is kind of a link because the Moomins come from the same idea of the imagination and using the imagination to cope during difficult times. And that is now an area of research that I am especially interested in, just partly because of some of the research that I've been doing in preparation for a book chapter coming out next year, if it makes it through peer review, which will be dealing with the body in magical handbooks, but also how bodies go about doing readings. So stay tuned because I might be talking more about that. That it has triggered off some ideas. So this video is the deep dive into Moominmamma and her handbag. Finally, I've been promising this on Patreon and all of my community tab posts. My cat is absent. I tried to record this last week, and firstly, I wasn't ready, and secondly, my cat just shouted at me the entire time, and it was so loud and so difficult that I couldn't put the video out. I also wasn't ready, and it's something that I've talked about. I've done a video for patrons. I'm not going to promote the Patreon site. You can just follow for free these days, but I'm sort of cautious about saying, oh yes, sign up and give me money, because I feel very complicated about that at this point. I am trying to find a space in which I sit in YouTube that is effective, but I wasn't expecting the video that I did on Audra to take off in the way that it did, and then to get promoted by people who I really love and respect in the YouTube space. Hi, Safi Writes Books, if you watch this. That was kind of amazing. And Savi made a lovely point in her video about Audra. She makes a point about how valuable it is to start small and have time to have videos that nobody watches that are quite bad. And you get time to learn the background side of creating. So as you shift from being an audience member into being a participant and a creator, that actually takes a lot of work and thought, especially these days. And I thought I would get about 50 views. I was not psychologically prepared for 15,000 at the time of recording this video. It has taken me about a month to adjust to that. I am also conscious that the second video is, oh my God, what are you going to do next? This is like the second album problem for musicians. What's this going to be? So I thought I would talk all about Moominmamma and her handbag, because that was the most requested video when I put out a little poll on Patreon. So I thought this would be the one that I did next. This is built from a piece of research that I did late last year that I wasn't expecting to do and was very obviously procrastination from having to do marking, because I grade about 300 papers between the 1st of November and the 1st of February every single year. And it is, I think, the hardest part of the year. It's not a really good time to decide that you're suddenly going to leave your academic specialism and start talking about handbags in children's fiction. But yeah, I went ahead and I did it anyway. This is me not making great choices. Now, I have ended up falling down about 3 different rabbit holes while working on this, but we are going to keep going and we'll see how we get on. Hello, welcome Indy to the video. Now, I will just say that I am not sure whether I'm going to do another video on Audrey Winter, because I have been checking her TikTok and kind of following it, but I don't have a particular angle at the moment. I can see how it might be useful, how it could be relevant to discuss the issue of going viral, why young people do want to go viral, and the role of drama in YouTube particularly, but also more broadly. I don't have enough content for that yet. I haven't been able to do the research because I am really supposed to be writing a chapter about bodies reading magical handbooks, and I haven't made much progress on that. I apologise if this is turning into something more appropriate for only fans or only cats. Okay, thank you, Indy. So this is Indy, yes, and she is going to be joining us, it seems, for the rest of the video. I am just going to carry on. There is a link between my last video, which was discussing the role of the imagination, really, and how we handle anxiety and the world more generally. As you know, she was a queer creator, and she will obviously have faced a great deal of intersecting difficulties. The starting point link is that the Moomins came out of her needing to cope with the extreme difficulties of the Second World War. That's where I've started to get really interested in looking more at the role of the imagination as a support mechanism, how that intersects with particular objects, especially magic objects. Before I end up ranting about that, I will focus and we will think about how all of that led to one of the most lovely fantasy worlds that has ever been created, which is Moomin Valley. Tove Jansson was an artist who grew up in post-independence Finland between the wars, and she too developed and wrote about a world that is Moomin Valley. I'm going to be saying Moomin about 8 million times, and there's a point where your mouth just kind of forgets how to function. She wrote about Moomin Valley as a way to survive the impact of the Second World War. We can get a sense of her politics from the satirical covers she drew for the literary magazine Guin, and you can see those. I'm going to try and point in the right direction. She pilloried both Hitler and Stalin. Now, the outbreak of war had this huge psychological impact on Jansson. She describes in her diaries not seeing the point of creating art given how hopeless everything felt. Finland, like the rest of sort of Eastern Europe, stuck between these huge powers of Russia and Nazi Germany, had a much more complicated experience of the Second World War than Western Europe and the US, where the good versus evil narrative is easier to present. And this is highlighted in Frank Cottrell Boyce's introduction to the new edition of Moomins and the Great Flood. He is the Children's Laureate for the UK, by the way. So this is the book, which I bought. I should hold that up for longer, shouldn't I, so you can actually see. So that is the book that I bought and then spent a long time working with over November, December, and then January last year and this year. Finland was newly independent. It had a very strong nationalist feeling embedded in it. This affected Tove's family. There's quite a lot of material background research on that and how that played into her particular art and who she was as a person that I'm not going to touch on. So Tove's means of coping was to start developing the world of Moomin Valley based on these little trolls that her uncle had taught her about when she was young. And they do appear in her early signatures as well. You can see sort of very first versions of those. That's often discussed by Moomin characters on their blogs. I will link to that down in the description. The first book came out in 1945. This summer has very much been about celebrating 80 years of the Moomins, of the publication of the first book, which is, this wonderful volume, which reproduces the original illustrations that Tova did and provide us with a starting point for analysing the art within the Moomins series and showing how they developed. Now, I got fascinated by the Moomins, not so much because I was obsessed as a child. I did love the Moomins, but they were not my core thing growing up. I absolutely loved the stop motion that was made because I like stop motion. I like the texturality of stop motion as opposed to sort of flat animation. It works particularly well for the Moomins because they have this otherworldly characteristic and it draws out the strangeness of their world really well. And then about 2.5 years ago, Instagram knows me so well and started pushing these adverts to make a Moomin house build up through Agostini, subscribe. And because I have no sense whatsoever, I did actually end up subscribing. I have a sideline interest in miniatures and making miniatures. I find miniature things fascinating. And that resulted in the ongoing Moomin House project. It also brought me much closer to the stories and to thinking about the Moomins in context and as fiction, as an imaginary world, which is how I think I got fascinated when they said they were going to release the book. I decided, I'm going to write an academic article about this. Last October, Sort of Books announced they were going to republish the book, and they were going to do a major art collaboration with Refugee Week and the Red Cross. I got excited probably because I was trying to distract myself from emergency surgery and 300 essays and decided to get a copy and read it. I started looking through it. Now, it's always quite difficult to trace where you start to get your ideas from, either writing fiction or as an academic. And I'm not quite sure how I ended up with the handbag thing. But I was at the same time starting to work on a fellowship idea that dealt with bundles and bags as ceremonial and non-ceremonial essential objects in people's lives. The two things got connected in my head. So that's eventually how I wrote the article. I then got approached by The Conversation because I'm in a group at my university and we study objects and bodies and cultures. My name was on there as working with the Moomins. And that's how I assume they got in touch because they contacted me via my university. And I ended up going to Bradford and being on a panel and discussing Moomins quite extensively. So that is where we jump in. One of the things that I think we have to start with when it comes to looking at this book is understanding the two main ways that it is really different to a lot of children's fiction. And this is highlighted by, again, Frank Cottrell Boyce, but others who have studied the Moomins, is that unlike other stories, the Moomins and the Great Flood starts by telling a story that is about trying to find a home as opposed to venturing out from a secure base and exploring the world. The other Moomin stories do take that approach. If you come at Moomins from watching the animated series, for example, I think the first story is very classically children's fiction of Moomin troll at home in the Moomin house, going out and having an adventure with Snufkin. But the very first story was about trying to find that home. There is no Moomin house. This is why I think in the future, if I can find the funding and get it together, I will actually focus on the Moomin house and write a book about the Moomin house because I think it's very interesting from that perspective. This is a story about refugees. It is a story about trying to find your way to a home. We don't know where the Moomins have come from. the little trolls, but we know that they are trying to find a home. It is entirely the opposite to sort of the standard kind of story that children get told. Hobbit starts from Hobbit living in a Hobbit house and going out on an adventure. Then Lord of the Rings does the same thing. You can see I'm a huge fan of Lord of the Rings. I don't follow children's literature now, but I think definitely that is a common theme. So, as Cottrell Boyce says, the Moomins have not left home in search of fame and fortune. It's the other way. It's the other way around. The end of their quest is to find a home. Then the other aspect that is so different to other types of children's fiction and young adult fiction is that rather than this being Moomin Troll setting off on his own adventure to explore the world that gets rid of the parents almost immediately, this is him with his mother, and his mother acting as mentor archetype, as the hero in many ways. She does all of the heroic acts in this apart until the very end, when Moomin Troll climbs on a bird and he goes flying around looking for help for someone. But mostly this is about a mother guiding her child, helping her child to survive in what would otherwise be a terrifying and very isolating environment. She is the one who is teaching him how to interact with the world. And it's a kind of a radical departure, because most fiction is based on doing away with the parents as soon as possible. There is actually some research. I will have to see if I can dig it out so that I can put a reference in the description below, or to one side maybe, about how and why mothers and parents disappear and die off and are entirely absent from children's and young adult fiction. To some degree, I can see the point that coming of age stories need to be about how you learn to stand on your own 2 feet as a human being. Stories like, say, The Hunger Games, where the relationship between mother and daughter is extremely strained, do highlight the lived difficult experience of childhood, parenthood, who is parent, who is child. That's a really great narrative to get into. But from a children's perspective, quite unusual to have mother be such a heroic and dynamic force. I think this is partly what made me fall in love with Moominmamma just a little bit. I have a model of Moominmamma here, so we can actually work with her. She obviously has the handbag that is absolutely essential. She is also wearing her apron, which we'll discuss a little bit more in depth later on, but that came from my mother, actually. She's absolutely lovely. I took her with me to Bradford because she likes going on adventures. So I am going to focus here particularly on her use of the handbag, which we will come back to. But just to give you a couple of examples of Moominmamma as the hero, I am now going to, I can't get other lovely YouTubers to come and read for me, so I will be reading, and I apologise if my reading is terrible. From the shadows behind a tree trunk, 2 eyes were staring at them. At first, Moominmamma was frightened too, but then she said soothingly, "It's really a very little creature. Wait, and I'll shine a light on it. Everything looks worse in the dark, you know." And so she picked up one of the big glowing flowers and lit the shadow up with it. So this introduces us to the character who's known throughout as the little creature, but is actually Sniff. And it also shows how she tends to respond to her environment as someone who thinks through, well, what could this actually be? Yes, I'm scared. How do I manage my fear? Let's shine a light on it. This discussion of the darkness, of shadow, of understanding that the dark can have an influence on how you perceive things, and that might not be accurate. Now, she is even more dynamic than this as a hero. You know, she isn't just kind of standing around being philosophical about the darkness. There's a much later scene where the floodwaters have risen and they are struggling, and they see a cat and its kittens. How appropriate. And my cat has gone to sleep on my special footstool for her. So she rescues the cat In the chair sat a wet cat with 5 equally wet kittens around her. "Poor mother!" cried Moominmamma, and she jumped into the water all the way up to her waist. "Hold on to me, and I'll try and catch them with my tail." She is the leader in what ends up being a triad, because you have Moomin Troll and the little creature most of the way through the story. The little creature is one of the first characters that we meet aside from the Moomins. Absolutely at the heart of Moominmamma's heroic behaviour is her handbag. Who knew that a handbag could be such a useful thing? To make a bit of a leap into the world of our great sci-fi grandmother, Ursula K. Le Guin, we can use Moominmamma's handbag as an example of one level of the carrier bag theory of fiction. That's this book here, which was originally published in the 1980s and has been republished by Terra Ignota as part of their feminist philosophy series. We will have to do a bit of an explanation of how this works. It's a very specific form of theoretical approach to novels, and it works on 2 fundamental levels. So you have the practical level, and that is the level at which objects appear in a story. And then you have the slightly more esoteric structural idea of the novel as a bag, as a carrier bag, rather than the sort of the linear sense of this has to be a thing that moves through time in a specific way. And Ursula Le Guin challenges both concepts. So Moominmamma's handbag and the way she uses it provides us with an example of the practical use of a bag rather than a sword or a weapon. There are very few illustrated moments where the handbag does not appear. The Moomins and the Great Flood, the original drawings, and we kind of have to be aware that as an author, Tove Jansson is still building the world at this point. There are other aspects that come in that finalize how characters appear. The characters evolve over time. They get rounder and larger, and their eyes certainly get bigger and much more expressive over time. So the handbag is one of those features that becomes more concretized in depictions of Moominmamma. But it is her role as mother, as of the supportive person, but also as a creative individual. There's a tendency to treat mothers in literature either as exceptionally flawed, someone that the protagonist is trying to escape from, or as these symbols of perfection that almost have no personality or flaws of their own. They are entirely subsumed into the personalities of their children. And Moominmamma is neither of those. She sits in this fantastic place that, although Tove Jansson does say, she puts her own needs aside, she knows how to hide her emotions, she knows how to perform the role of the mother and to put her children and all of the members of the various people who come to live at the Moomin house, she knows how to put them first. But she is also very wise. The reason why she does not appear in many stories as a protagonist is because she doesn't struggle with any misbeliefs about the world. She is very tuned into how the world works and very effective at managing her emotions, but she is also creative. She uses the bag to collect items that she wants to be creative with. There's a lovely comic about her painting a mural on the walls of the kitchen and all the things that she wants to have in her world, all the things that means a great deal to her. It's not just that she and the bag are significant. It's that when you think about the bag and its function, it allows us to think about how we consider objects in fiction more broadly. And this was where Ursula Le Guin really wanted to challenge the notion that when you are writing fiction, the core object is going to be a weapon. She is one of the preeminent philosophers and writers of science fiction for the 20th century. She wrote for children and young adults and adults. I grew up reading Her fiction, The Dispossessed, deals with the tensions between communistic and capitalistic societies. The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas is about the idea of utopias. That is a fundamental critique of Western society. The carrier bag theory of fiction built on this exploration of feminist and leftist thinking by suggesting that we could move away from the idea of the most fundamental and important object in hero story being a weapon. So she describes how difficult it actually is to do this because the weapon is obvious. It is an object of conflict. And she says, "It is hard to tell a really gripping tale of how I wrested a wild oat from its husk, and then another, and then another, and then another. No, it does not compare. It cannot compete with how I thrust my spear deep into the titanic hairy flank, while Oob, impaled on one huge sweeping tusk, writhed screaming, and blood spouted everywhere in crimson torrents." Now, as much as, she says it's very easy to create that, war is such a common feature of science fiction and fantasy as the biggest and most obvious source of conflict. That means you're going to have weapons at absolutely the core of it. Most of these central stories around coming of age, you think about Star Wars being based on, he's found a weapon. Katniss is great with a weapon, a very specific weapon, and it's weird to think, could we have a bag instead? So she says, we've heard it. We've heard all about all the sticks and spears and swords, the things to bash and poke and hit with, the long, hard things. But we have not heard about the thing to put things in, the container for the thing contained. That is a new story. That is news. She built the idea on a growing field of research in archaeology that dealt with bags as being the fundamental technology that might have transformed human society as hunter-gatherer communities rather than the development of weapons. Now, there is an issue. Bags are made of non-durable materials. So they're made of wrappings of fabrics, things that break down over time. So they are much less likely to survive in the archaeological record compared to flintstones, compared to metals. The classic objects of violence are much more likely to survive than are objects that are being used to carry things in. But they were critical. The majority of food supplied to early groups was most likely gathered rather than hunted because it is easier to do that. You don't want to risk dying all the time. It's much easier to go and collect food than it is to go and try and kill it. But you've got to be able to carry it. You can't just carry it in your hands. Well, you can carry some of it in your hands, but the more you have in your hands, the less you can collect. So collecting something becomes very, very important. Bags then go on to acquire ritual significance in the forms of bundles of various types, which is some of my research is about collecting small objects into bags and bundles. I did see a lovely post on Threads with people sharing their trinket bags. So if you have a trinket bag or you have a handbag, it might be worth going and looking what you keep in it, what gives it value. We can also think about pockets. A pocket is a form of a bag. It's why it means so much to women to be able to have pockets in things. That is an important element of this story. Throughout Tove Jansson's work, Moominmamma is represented using what we would call the traditional semiotics of motherhood. She is highly domesticated. She represents the home. She's described by, I'm going to mess up the name, Daimel Trzybiatowska. I do apologise. And Mathiasson 2022, she says, she sees the good in everyone and blames no one. Her tolerance and understanding are ideal. She has mastered Socratic maiutics perfectly, which she realises in well-conducted dialogues, willingly adopting the mask of naivety. She wise to the degree that in studies examining the relationship between the different Moomin characters, Moomin Troll goes to her for a real perspective on the world. Now, as much as we like Moominpapa, and Moominpapa has his place, Moominpapa's view of the world is not necessarily the real world. He is slightly pompous, he's a silly goose, he gets ideas in his head, and the delight of him, honestly, but also he is going to give very dramatic versions and renderings of reality. And Moomin Troll knows that if he wants the real perspective, he needs to go to his mother, he needs to go to Moominmamma. Now, the specific forms of identification, let's go back to having a look at Moominmamma here. She is shown with the lovely red and white apron that she always wears, and the bag, obviously, but she did not always have the apron. The apron was added by the English publisher at Associated Newspapers, Charles Sutton, because when they decided that they were going to publish the comics, I believe, in England, he said that she needed to be more identifiable. And in fact, all of the Moomins needed to be more identifiable, because all she had to do was drop the bag and she just looked like every other Moomin. And this is a whole other argument that we could have about how gender is constructed, certainly by external objects, because all of the Moomins look the same. Once you drop the objects, you take off Moominpapa's hat and he puts down his cane, he looks identical to Moominmamma. And I suspect that this is deliberate on Tove Jansson's part as a queer author who did not conform to stereotypes. But despite this, Jansson herself did describe Moominmamma as never letting people see that she was worrying about them or notice that she is waiting for them. Just the knowledge that she is there, she knows how to fulfill that role. She also enjoys collecting shells and making boats out of bark, so she is highly creative. She collects items, she uses the handbag for that as well, so it's not just an object that she uses for other people. So, and as I mentioned before, she takes her painting and she produces a mural on the walls of the Moomin house. And the bag sits at the center of that. But the bag allows her to do her job as Moominmamma. So she carries sets of objects that she can use at any moment. She's also collecting objects. So talk about her collecting shells and bark, but as we're going to see in the book, she also collects food, she collects anything that might be useful. And this very often happens off page and is only revealed when other characters need those items. So it is a personal bundle to her. It is absolutely vital to her survival, and she knows it. Now, I will just talk a little bit about the bag itself as an object before we get into discussing Moominmamma's particular relationship with the bag and her emotional relationship with the bag outside of the first book. So I did a bit of research on handbags and fashionable handbags, because the thing that you notice about that handbag is patent leather. It has a clasp at the top, it's top opening, it is a fashion item. Both my grandmothers had bags like that. I don't know if that is still part of the grandmother iconography. I had it as part of my sense of my grandmothers, that they had a bag that always had something in. My great aunt as well always seemed to have a bag, and because she was a rambler and was a very straightforward, straight thinking sort of person, she always carried toilet roll in it just in case she was out in the wilderness and needed to go all of a sudden. So that is how useful these handbags can be. I looked into whether I could find a design that might match the bag. So I had a look at the Ivo collection. There is actually a handbag museum, and various people have done research on handbags and how handbags were designed in the 1930s, thinking that when Tove Jansson was writing, this kind of handbag was sort of universal. Chanel was developing handbag styles like that, but you have the Corday design of the 1940s, which would have been typical. And it's a fashion item. And this takes us into the book. and a little bit about the refugee experience, in that the handbag is a fashion item. It would have been commonly seen in, say, Germany in the 1920s, Paris, London in the 1940s, but its presence in the specific dark forest, the flood, the chaotic atmosphere of Moomin Valley and the surrounding area as it is in the first book is quite significant. Its appearance in a breaking environment, in a world that is falling apart and refinding itself, hints at the link to these are people who are having the worst day. That is the refugee experience of having the worst day and maybe not getting to choose which items you'd want to take. We often talk in conversation, what would you take if your house was on fire? If you had to leave suddenly, what would you take with you? And you often don't get the choice you think that you would have. So Moominmamma takes her handbag, which turns out actually to be the most useful thing. It reminds us when we're reading the story that these aren't two little Moomins, little people who have gone out in the world out of choice. They are trying to find a home because they don't have one and they desperately need one. And that is absolutely the core of being a refugee. It can be sudden and it can be horrifying, and you have to manage it. I believe that is what the handbag does. Its very survival in this hostile landscape lends support to the narrative of dislocation in the Moomins and the Great Flood, and also their tenacity. It shows just how brave in small ways that you can be and how you just cope with every situation. This is how Moominmamma copes, is she puts things in the bag and she takes things out when she needs them. Now, let's talk about her emotional relationship with the bag. It does have almost talismanic significance to her. It's an essential part of who she is as a person. You see it if you watch movies, the series. She often has it on her arm when she's doing things that make it actually quite difficult to have a handbag on her arm. We watched most recently movie Moomins on the Riviera, and that gives you a real sense of Moominmamma's character, actually, because she very quickly realizes that it's all very superficial on the Riviera and she has no interest in celebrity or pomp and circumstance. She goes off to an island and lives under a broken boat and grows plants, which is intensely Moominmamma coded. It's just so delightful. But what she does with the bag, so she has the bag when she's watering the flowers, she has the bag when she doesn't need it. She holds onto this bag like you would not believe. And Janssen remarks that she keeps things she may suddenly need in a large bag, for example, stomach powder and wire wool, sweets, dry socks, and the like. So just about anything that you can fit in a small bag. It has such a strong relationship to Moominmamma that in the recently republished The World of Moomin Valley, which is basically Philip Ardar's sort of presentation of every aspect of Moomin Valley and the Moomins, it actually gets its own 2-page spread just to kind of demonstrate just how critical it is. And he describes it as having 4 pockets and full of very useful things. He also says she never goes anywhere without her large, trusty black handbag. When it goes missing, she is absolutely distraught, and it is a Moomin Valley moment. In Finn Family Moomin Troll, Thingamy and Bob, who are little creatures, they take the bag and they want to use it to sleep, and Thingamy and Bob have a very different relationship with materials and the concept of ownership compared to other people. They just take it because they think it would make a good house, and they don't understand that it's something that belongs to somebody else and they can't just take it. When the handbag goes missing, that is headline news. Absolutely headline news. Typically, for the Moomins, if you are a Moomin fan, you will know that all Moomin things end with a party. So a party is promised as a reward to the finder. Now, in the exploits of Moominpapa, we are back to Moominpapa, and note that it does say described by himself. So we know just to be a little bit cautious about the reality that he is projecting. Love you, Moominpapa, but just always take what you say with a pinch of salt. He is the first person narrator of this episode, but towards the end of the book, he describes meeting Moominmamma. I don't know how she got there. We never learn how this happens. But he describes her washing up. She is on the beach where he is, and her first concern is for the handbag. This was a Moomin, like myself, but still more beautiful, a little Moomin woman that I had saved. Suddenly, she sat up and cried, "Save my handbag! Oh, save my handbag!" "But you're holding it," I answered. So Moominmamma's ability to even, like, she holds onto this bag even when she's apparently drowning at sea. I don't know that I would be able to hold onto a bag while drowning at sea. This is just how critical it is. She then goes on to open it up and kind of uses it as a way to emotionally restore herself, to regulate herself. So, "Oh, glory be," she said. She opened her large black handbag and started rummaging in its depths. At last she found her powder compact. "I'm afraid my powder's sea damaged," she said sadly. "You're every bit as beautiful without it," I replied gallantly. She gave me an unfathomable look and blushed deeply. And that isn't the core of Moominmamma. I don't know what is. So in the specific context of the flood, we have now finally reached the book itself. We see the core of the relationship between Moominmamma and the bag and how she uses it to survive in this horrendous situation. The handbag and Moominmamma are tied together. So what I did was I went and counted all of the pictures, 46 pictures in the new edition, reproducing all of the originals. Moominmamma is visible and identifiable in 25 of them. Some of them just show the environment, some of them show sort of action that you can't really see. Some of them feature other characters altogether. So these drawings then show the handbag in 15 of those, show it either in action, such as climbing the rope ladder into the gentleman's suite world fairly early on, held up when she approaches the Hattifatteners. You can also see it when she interacts with others, when it's just set beside her. So there's an instance where she is sleeping on page 24, which shows it to one side. I really want to show these. Now, I have been really cautious with imagery because one of my issues is that I don't want to really get in trouble with Moomin characters because I would like to be able to work with them in future. You can just see the handbag there when she's fast asleep. And I think there's potentially is there another picture there? Oh yes. So, and in this one, on the opposite page, there is the handbag. Point made. That might actually be an extra one. I don't think I caught that one on the first round. It is just, even if she isn't holding it, it's right by her. There is, let's pick out the image at page 36. It's live research going on here. So on page 36, she has to deal with the lion. And you can see, this is me learning how to work on camera. So you can see there is the handbag. Again, this is her dealing with the Hattifatteners. There she is, she's holding it up. So everywhere we go, we see Moominmamma and her handbag. Let's see if I have because the incident with the picture, this lovely picture here on page 31 shows her actually going to sleep. She's not feeling very well. They eat a lot of food. So there we have her climbing the rope ladder. Oops. There we go. And on the opposite page, going up the stairs. There we are. There we are again. She is with Tulipa and the gentleman leading them into the world made of sweets, which we are going to have to come back to. It's not just a symbol though, because it actually carries things, as I keep going back to. It is protective for her, but she is always keeping things handy. And there's a lovely moment really early on where she draws out a set of socks because Moomin Troll falls in some water. And you will be aware that Moomins don't wear socks. They don't wear anything aside from, these symbolic items. They don't wear clothes. She gets out these socks and they are, again, we're talking about material semiotics, academic phrasing. She is using these to demonstrate this is a comfort item. This is something that you take out because somebody is cold and they're wet and they need something to feel better. So what better thing than being given a pair of nice dry socks? She actually also carries some really unexpected items in the bag. One point on page 56, they find a message in a bottle. So they find this bottle floating along, and Moomin Troll is quite dismissive of it, which again sort of points to Moomin Troll learning how to be more curious about the world from his mother. And Moominmamma picks up the bottle and she's really curious about what's inside it. And she brings out a corkscrew. And it's a moment where you think, this person has literally everything in this bag. Like, if you were with Moominmamma and you needed something, she would just fish around in her bag and there it would be. And so let's go on and have a look at how else she used it. She doesn't worry. She just gets out the thing that's needed. So she also shows a great deal of foresight. And again, this points to the need for people who are traveling in uncertain environments to remain situationally aware. She is situationally aware on a level that neither Sniff, as the little creature, or Moomin Troll are, because they're just having these experiences. And she's going, well, what am I going to need, like, 2 days down the line? So at this point, there is a very, very dark point about page 50 where they are sick of the rather rubbish food that they've been eating and they need nicer food. And they don't want to do anything. It's wet, it's rainy, it's, as Jansen describes, everything was grey and melancholy. And this is what Moominmamma does. It's no good, we must go on, said Moominmamma. But here is something for you which I've been saving until it was really needed. And then she produced a large bar of chocolate from her handbag. She had taken it with her from the old gentleman's wonderful garden. She split it in two and gave them each a piece. So she is capable of using this bag, not just to kind of produce items, but she's constantly collecting them as well, which just shows what a dynamic and kind of fascinatingly aware person she is. She's always thinking one step ahead. So this kind of goes back to, where on earth has she gotten this corkscrew from? She knows how to open a bottle. She's clearly, lived a comfortable life in other times, and she has this item with her for when she needs it. So all of this kind of coalesces together to illustrate something that is worth thinking about when you read books, is thinking more deeply about what you see on the page and how characters function and the objects that they use. Now, this was the essential story of, let's put this, I still can't do this with my, knowing that I'm being mirrored is really tricky. This is the carrier bag theory of fiction. And what Tove Jansson did in 1945, before this book had even been, before she'd actually before Ursula K. Le Guin actually stepped up and did this and wrote about this, she shows how an object that is not a weapon could be so valuable and important. And it really is an invitation to think more carefully about the objects that we choose to give characters. When we read books, it's really interesting to think about characters and the things that they carry and what they carry those things in. And I have literally just looked across and seen my cassette tapes of The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien and thinking about how critical the pocket is as an object. I could go on and write an academic article about that, about the carry bag theory of fiction and how it plays out in The Hobbit, coming soon to a YouTube channel near you. So understanding the role of the handbag and its importance to Moominmamma is essential to understanding the migrant experience, the refugee experience, and how we have these complex relationships with objects that we really don't think about very often. It's also an opportunity to understand and think about the story as a bag, carrying all the hopes and fears of those on uncertain journeys through difficult worlds, as both Ursula Le Guin and Tove Jansson hoped to achieve. So thank you very, very much for watching this video. If you made it this far to the end, tell me about your favorite bag and tell me about your favorite pocket. Any time that you have encountered a bag or an object like that in fiction. I do have a Patreon. I write on that weekly. I am being cautious about promoting signing up for that at any paid level because I haven't kind of figured out the benefits to that. And I feel like, as a very small creator, this is a little bit early for me to be doing anything like that. But otherwise, the usual: like, subscribe, share, enjoy, come back for more Moomin content. I'm probably going to write something about reading and the body and how we deal with books and the body next, because that's what I'm researching right now. And if I can get things to overlap with videos and research, then that's always a good thing. Other than that, thank you for coming to my extremely long TED Talk about Moominmamma and her handbag.